Good evening, Internet. Well, my one of the problems with living out here in the sticks is internet, and we're working on it. We did get the Starlink. Working on trying to figure out how to get that installed. We have a fairly steep roof, and my old bones and joints are a little fragile to be crawling around up there and doing it, but we're figuring out a solution. We did buy some scaffolding to maybe approach it from the outside of the house and go over but it's not tall enough. So I'm gonna try just throwing a rope over it, tying it off somewhere sturdy and hanging on to that and getting it installed, because finding reputable people to install things down here is a lot different. We don't have a contractor's board like they do up there in the Pacific Northwest. So things get a little interesting, but you vet people the best you can. Learn the hard way to make sure you do that. But live and learn. Is what it is. But anyway, the internet we do have, we use the Verizon hotspots right now, and they all reset in the morning. So I thought I would do a story tonight, and I'll have internet to post it tomorrow, which was it MLK's birthday tomorrow, or when they're recognizing it or something. Schools are out, probably banks and no mail and stuff like that will be closed, so whatever. But anyway, it's been adventurous the last couple of days. I was able to get a tree trimmed. The scaffolding did come in handy for that. And with our 14-foot ceilings, we're going to need it sometime to replace lights or work on ceiling fixtures, or, anyway. So, and I can use it for stuff up high in the shop. And so it's not a bad thing. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. You ready for more Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz? Let's see if they get out of this land of glass and vegetable people. Yes, sounds horrific. So, all right, here we go. Into the black pit and out again. When they came to the mountain, it proved to be a rugged, towering chunk of deep green glass, and looked dismal and forbidding in the extreme. Halfway up the steep was a yawning cave, black as night beyond the point where the rainbow rays of the colored suns reached into it. The Mangaboos drove the horse and the kitten and the piglets into this dark hole, and then, having pushed the buggy in after them, for it seemed some of them had dragged it all the way from the domed hall, they began to pile big glass rocks within the entrance so that the prisoners could not get out again. "This is dreadful," groaned Jim. "It will be about the end of our adventures, I guess." "If the wizard was here," said one of the piglets, sobbing bitterly, "he would not see us suffer so." "We ought to have called him and Dorothy when we were first attacked," added Eureka. "But never mind. Be brave, my friends, and I will go and tell our masters where you are, and get them to come to your rescue." The mouth of the hole was nearly filled up now, but the kitten gave a leap through the remaining opening and at once scampered up into the air, and the Mangaboos saw her escape, and several of them caught up their thorns and gave chase, mounting through the air after her. Eureka, however, was lighter than the Mangaboos, and while they could mount only about 100 feet above the earth, the kitten found she could go nearly 200 feet. So she ran along over their heads until she had left them far behind and below, and had come to the city and the house of the sorcerer. There she entered in at Dorothy's window in the dome and aroused her from her sleep. As soon as the little girl knew what had happened, she awakened the wizard and Zeb, and at once preparations were made to go to the rescue of Jim and the piglets. The wizard carried his satchel, which was quite heavy, and Zeb carried the 2 lanterns and the oil can. Dorothy's wicker suitcase was still under the seat of the buggy, and by good fortune the boy had also placed the harness in the buggy when he had taken it off from Jim to let the horse lie down and rest. So there was nothing for the girl to carry but the kitten, which she held close to her bosom and tried to comfort, for its little heart was still beating rapidly. Some of the Mangaboos discovered them as soon as they left the house of the sorcerer, but when they started toward the mountain, the vegetable people allowed them to proceed without interference, yet followed in a crowd behind them so that they could not go back again. Before long they neared the black pit, where a busy swarm of Mangaboos, headed by their princess, was engaged in piling up glass rocks before the entrance. "Stop, I command you!" cried the wizard in an angry tone, and at once began pulling down the rocks to liberate Jim and the piglets. Instead of opposing him in this, they stood back in silence until he had made a good-sized hole in the barrier, when by order of the princess they all sprang forward and thrust out their sharp thorns. Dorothy hopped inside the opening to escape being pricked, and Zeb and the wizard, after enduring a few stabs from the thorns, were glad to follow her. At once the Mangaboos began piling up the rocks of glass again. Through the black pit. And as the little man realized that they were all about to be entombed in the mountain, he said to the children, "My dears, what shall we do? Jump out and fight?" "What's the use?" replied Dorothy. "I'd as soon die here as live much longer among those cruel and heartless people." "That's the way I feel about it," remarked Zeb, rubbing his wounds. "I've had enough of the Mangaboos." "All right," said the wizard. "I'm with you, whatever you decide, but we can't live long in this cavern, that's certain." Noticing that the light was growing dim, he picked up his 9 piglets, patted each one lovingly on its fat little head, and placed them carefully in his inside pocket. Zeb struck a match and lighted one of the lanterns. The rays of the colored suns were now shut out from them forever, for the last chinks had been filled up in the wall that separated their prison from the land of the Mangaboos. "How big is this hole?" asked Dorothy. "I'll explore it and see," replied the boy. So he carried the lantern back for quite a distance, while Dorothy and the wizard followed at his side. The cavern did not come to an end, and as they expected it would, but slanted upward through the great glass mountain, running in a direction that promised to lead them to the side opposite the Mangaboo country. "It isn't a bad road," observed the wizard, "and if we followed it, it might lead us to some place that is more comfortable than this black pocket we are now in. I suppose the vegetable folk were always afraid to enter this cavern because it is dark, but we have our lanterns to light the way, so I propose that we start out and discover where this tunnel in the mountain leads to." The others agreed readily to this sensible suggestion, and at once the boy began to harness Jim to the buggy. When all was in readiness, the three took their seats in the buggy, and Jim started cautiously along the way, Zeb driving, while the Wizard and Dorothy each held a lighted lantern so the horse could see where to go. Sometimes the tunnel was so narrow that the wheels of the buggy grazed the sides. Then it would broaden out as wide as a street. But the floor was usually smooth, and for a long time they traveled on without any accident. Jim stopped sometimes to rest, for the climb was rather steep and tiresome. "We must be nearly as high as the 6 colored suns by this time," said Dorothy. "I didn't know this mountain was so tall." "We are certainly a good distance away from the land of the Mangaboos," added Zeb, "for we have slanted away from it ever since we started." But they kept steadily moving, and just as Jim was about tired out with his long journey, the way suddenly grew lighter, and Zeb put out the lanterns to save the oil. To their joy, they found it was a white light that now greeted them, for all were weary of the colored rainbow lights, which, after a time, had made their eyes ache with their constantly shifting rays. The sides of the tunnel showed before them like the inside of a long spyglass, and the floor became more level. Jim hastened his lagging steps at this assurance of a quick relief from the dark passage, and in a few moments more they had emerged from the mountain and found themselves face to face with a new and charming country. The light at the end of the tunnel. The Valley of the Voices. By journeying through the glass mountain, they had reached a delightful valley that was shaped like the hollow of a great cup, with another rugged mountain showing on the other side of it, and soft and pretty green hills at the ends. It was all laid out into lovely lawns and gardens, with pebble paths leading through them, and groves of beautiful, stately trees. Stupid bugs. No, that wasn't part of the book. It didn't say stupid bugs. I did. It was all laid out into lovely lawns and gardens, with pebble paths leading through them, and groves of beautiful and stately trees dotting the landscape here and there. There were orchards, too, bearing luscious fruits that are all unknown in our world. Alluring brooks of crystal water flowed sparkling between the flower-strewn banks, while scattered over the valley were dozens of the quaintest and most picturesque cottages our travelers had ever beheld. None of them were in clusters, such as villages or towns, but each had ample grounds of its own, with orchards and gardens surrounding it. As the new arrivals gazed upon this exquisite scene, they were enraptured by its beauties and the fragrance that permeated the soft air which they breathed so gratefully after the confined atmosphere of the tunnel. Several minutes were consumed in silent admiration before they noticed two very singular and unusual facts about this valley. One was that it was lighted from some unseen source, for no sun or moon was in the arched blue sky, although every object was flooded with a clear and perfect light. The second and even more singular fact was the absence of any inhabitant of this splendid place. From their elevated position, they could overlook the entire valley, but not a single moving object could they see. All appeared mysteriously deserted. The mountain on this side was not glass, but made of a stone similar to granite. With some difficulty and danger, Jim drew the buggy over the loose rocks until he reached the green lawns below, where the paths and orchards and gardens began. The nearest cottage was still some distance away. "Isn't it fine?" cried Dorothy in a joyous voice as she sprang out of the buggy and let Eureka run frolicking over the velvety grass. Yes, indeed, answered Zeb. We were lucky to get away from those dreadful vegetable people. It wouldn't be so bad, remarked the wizard, gazing around him, if we were obliged to live here always. We couldn't find a prettier place, I'm sure. He took the piglets from his pocket and let them run on the grass, and Jim tasted a mouthful of the green blades and declared he was very contented in his new surroundings. We can't walk in the air here, though, called Eureka, who had tried it and failed, but the others were satisfied to walk on the ground, and the wizard said they must be nearer to the surface of the earth than they had been in the Mangaboo country, for everything was more homelike and natural. But where are the people? Asked Dorothy. The little man shook his bald head. Can't imagine, my dear, he replied. They heard the sudden twittering of a bird, but could not find the creature anywhere. Slowly they walked along the path toward the nearest cottage, the piglets racing and gamboling, the word. Beside them, that's a new word for me. And Jim paused at every step for another mouthful of grass. Presently they came to a low plant which had broad, spreading leaves, in the center of which grew a single fruit, but about as large as a peach. The fruit was so daintily colored and so fragrant and looked so appetizing and delicious that Dorothy stopped and exclaimed, "What is it, do you suppose?" The piglets had smelled the fruit quickly, and before the girl could reach out her hand to pluck it, in every one of the nine tiny ones had rushed in and commenced to devour it with great eagerness. "It's good, anyway," said Zeb, "or those little rascals wouldn't have gobbled it up so greedily." "Where are they?" asked Dorothy in astonishment. They all looked around, but the piglets had disappeared. "Dear me," cried the wizard. "They must have run away, but I didn't see them go. Did you?" "No," replied the boy and the girl together. "Here, Piggy, Piggy, Piggy," called their master anxiously. Several squeals and grunts were instantly heard at his feet, but the wizard could not discover a single piglet. "Where are you?" he asked. "Why, right beside you," spoke a tiny voice. "Can't you see us?" "No," answered the little man in a puzzled tone. We can see you," said another of the piglets. The wizard stooped down and put out his hand, and at once felt the small fat body of one of his pets. He picked it up, but could not see what he held. "It is very strange," said he soberly. "The piglets have become invisible in some curious way." "I'll bet it's because they ate that peach," cried the kitten. "It wasn't a peach, Eureka," said Dorothy. "I only hope it wasn't poison." "It was fine, Dorothy," called one of the piglets. We'll eat all we can find of them," said another. "But we mustn't eat them," the wizard warned the children, "or we too may become invisible and lose each other. If we come across another of the strange fruit, we must avoid it." Calling the piglets to him, he picked them all up one by one and put them away in his pocket, for although he could not see them, he could feel them, and when he had buttoned his coat, he knew they were safe for the present. The travelers now resumed their walk toward the cottage, which they presently reached. It was a pretty place, with vines growing thickly over the broad front porch. The door stood open, and a table was set in the front room, with 4 chairs drawn up to it. On the table were plates, knives and forks, and dishes of bread, meat, and fruits. The meat was smoking hot, and the knives and forks were performing strange antics and jumping here and there in quite a puzzling way, but not a single person appeared to be in the room. How funny, exclaimed Dorothy, who with Zeb and the wizard now stood in the doorway. A peal of merry laughter answered her, and the knives and forks fell to the plates with a clatter. One of the chairs pushed back from the table, and this was so astonishing and mysterious that Dorothy was almost tempted to run away in fright. "Here are strangers, Mamma," cried the shrill and childish voice of some unseen person. "So I see, my dear," answered another voice, soft and womanly. "What do you want?" demanded a third voice in a stern, gruff accent. Well, well," said the wizard. "Are there really people in this room?" "Of course," replied the man's voice. "And pardon me for the foolish question, but are you all invisible?" Fooling the Mangaboos with... Well, that picture's kind of out of place. This was the last couple chapters ago. Fooling the Mangaboos with fire. Oh well. Sure. Are you all invisible? Surely, the woman answered, repeating her low, rippling laughter. Are you surprised that you are unable to see the people of Vo? The invisible people of Vo. Why, yes, stammered the wizard. All the people I have ever met were very plain to see. Where do you come from, then? Asked the woman in a curious tone. We belong upon the face of the earth, explained the wizard. But recently, during an earthquake, we fell down a crack and landed in the country of the Mangaboos. Dreadful creatures, exclaimed the woman's voice. I've heard of them. They walled us up in a mountain, continued the wizard, but we found there was a tunnel through to this side, so we came here. It is a beautiful place. What do you call it? It is the Valley of Vo. Thank you. We have seen no people since we arrived, so we came to this house to inquire our way. Are you hungry? Asked the woman's voice. I could eat something, said Dorothy. So could I, added Zeb. But we do not wish to intrude, I assure you, the wizard hastened to say. That's all right, returned the man's voice more pleasantly than before. You are welcome to what we have. As he spoke, the voice came so near to Zeb that he jumped back in alarm. Two childish voices laughed merrily at this action, and Dorothy was sure they were in no danger among such light-hearted folks, even if those folks couldn't be seen. What curious animal is that which is eating the grass on my lawn? Inquired the man's voice. That's Jim, said the girl. He's a horse. What is he good for? Was the next question. He draws the buggy you see fastened to him, and we ride in the buggy instead of walking, she explained. Can he fight? Asked the man's voice. No, he can kick pretty hard with his heels and bite a little, but Jim can't exactly fight, she replied. Then the bears will get him, said one of the children's voices. Bears? exclaimed Dorothy. Are these bears here? That is the one evil of our country, answered the invisible man. Many large and fierce bears roam in the valley of Vo, and when they can catch any of us, they eat us up. But as they cannot see us, we seldom get caught. Are the bears invisible too? Asked the girl. Yes, for they eat of the dama fruit. Dama fruit, as we all do, and that keeps them from being seen by any eye, whether human or animal. Does the dama fruit grow on a low bush and look something like a peach? Asked the wizard. Yes, was the reply. If it makes you invisible, why do you eat it? Dorothy inquired. For two reasons, my dear, the woman's voice answered. The dormant fruit is the most delicious thing that grows, and when it makes us invisible, the bears cannot find us to eat us up. But now, good wanderers, your luncheon is on the table, so please sit down and eat as much as you like. Dorothy and the kitty. Ooh. Already. The next chapter, they fight the invisible bears. Rawr. 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 Gotta watch them bears. Oh goodness. Trying to keep organized anymore. Oh well, never mind. Anyway, well, they got away from the Mangaboos. Now they got to worry about bears. Rawr. Anyway, sounds like a cool place. Very beautiful. I'd like if we had a creek out the back of the property. That'd be nice. But we have a nice place here, so it'll do. It'll do. And anyway, I hope you're having a good 2023. We're halfway through the first month. A couple weeks into it. Yeah. It's been good. I hope yours has too. Sweet dreams.